This is the unfiltered truth about entrepreneurship. Raw, no BS, no sugarcoating. Welcome to Entrepreneur Intel. I'm your host, Wes Mathews. Each episode, we'll learn from experienced founders and uncover the top 5% learnings that led to their success in all things personal, family, and business. This show is sponsored by Stealth Consulting, delivering clear marketing strategies, ROI, and no surprises. So today's guest, super excited. His entrepreneurial journey started with a single piece of real estate, but has since grown to over 900 units. He has over 35 employees doing 3.5 and more property management. Over 130 million in property holdings. He also helps investors harness the business power of real estate investments. He's a pilot, a helicopter pilot, a pilot of planes, owner of Epic Property Management. Josh Sterling. Josh, welcome.
Thanks, Wes. Appreciate you having me on.
Man, that's a mouthful there. That's a lot of stuff. But I got to start with this question. So you've been doing this entrepreneurial thing for, I think, about 15 years. What's the most important lesson you've learned thus far?
All right. So, yeah, I definitely didn't start out as an entrepreneur or with the goal to be an entrepreneur. It was, I'm sure we'll get into it, quite the unintended journey. The looking back and knowing that you might ask me that today, I racked my brain a little bit to think about what is this big key piece of success, knowledge, this tip that I could, provide. And frankly, it's back to the most simple thing. It's boring. So here's my amazing advice on that entrepreneurial journey. I truly believe that any success I have found is 90+% tied to unwavering efficiency and relentless tracking. How boring is that, right?
Process
it. I've looked back and I've thought about the journey along the way and what has helped me and what is, of course I think any entrepreneur does. And what I've realized is that it's about the most boring thing in the world, but I am the guy that follows through on every single thing to the end of the day. Zero inbox, nothing left on the list, whatever it takes to do. And again, it sounds boring, but I don't know how common that is out there. And I think that has been a huge driver of success for me.
So did you find that out like early on as a kid? Were you doing things where you're just like, where did you discover that you just kind of yearn for that?
I've always just had a lot of perseverance. And, I don't think I've ever been the smartest guy in the room, and I certainly am not the most creative. There's a lot of businesses out there that I'm sure that advice and that mindset doesn't get you very far. But there's also a lot of businesses out there, such as mine, where it's really a day-to-day. It's almost a grind. That's a boring way to put it. There's a lot more energy behind it than a grind, but yeah, for sure. But I think that, if you're in the type of business where there's these high-flying opportunities and there's this, this new technology coming about and this new amazing creative idea, that might not apply to you so much. But in a real, boots on the ground, day-to-day operational business, such as what we're in, to me, it really just comes down to just unwavering efficiency and just relentless tracking, monitoring is truly what we've been built on. And it's how we become, successful in our industry and our niche.
Yeah, I'm excited to unpack that with you because there's a couple big things in there. One, I want to talking a little bit about, you being a pilot. Was that early on in your career? Because everything you're telling me, I'm like, man, like that's a great pilot, right? Making sure that everything's done properly, measure twice, cut once kind of a concept. So was that sort of your first, I guess, call it job coming out of high school before you became an entrepreneur?
Actually, it's a quick side note, funny story. My first job, I worked at a McDonald's, which is like a assembly line back in my hometown. It was like the one job you could get before you turned 16 years old. At like 15 in 3 months or something, you could work there. Some weird things. I worked there right away, and it was a very systematic approach. But I actually remember back to getting that job, and I had to go in there like 15 times. Like it wasn't like today. I think we could just walk in anywhere and get a job. It was like a coveted position to get amongst high school kids because you needed to make some money. And I remember that general manager telling me like, "Wow, you're the most persistent person I've ever met," and it's just kind of stuck with me. I've always kind of been that way. But no, I went off to college. I grew up in California. I went off to college at a school in Florida called Embry-Riddle, which is a large aviation school, and almost everybody that goes through there in the aviation program goes to work for the airlines, goes to fly for the airlines. So that was my master plan, and it didn't go. I'm having to dive more into that. It didn't go exactly as planned, and led me down the entrepreneurial path. But a lot of that training, a lot of that, learning to be an airline pilot is absolutely a systematic, procedural type career. So I don't know if it was like the chicken and the egg. I don't know if I'm that kind of person or if that career made me that kind of person. But
Yeah.
we are definitely a checklist-driven, SOP, systematic, procedural company.
Yeah. What tripped that for you, right? So you're a pilot, you go to school. I mean, I would assume that going to school, being a pilot, like that's a big deal. Maybe families are like, Josh is a pilot, this is your career, or and then all of a sudden you're like, I don't want to do this. Or obviously you do it at a different capacity, but what kind of led
Yep.
you to look elsewhere? Because I think about a pilot, and maybe it's just a bad perception, but they're like career pilots, right? They just kind of do their
Yep.
thing and then you retire and life is
Yep.
good. But you were at some point where like, no,
Yeah. So it is a great job. And actually right now today, it's probably one of the greatest careers you could go into. But it wasn't for a long time. And there's a whole history of, the aviation industry in America, but going back to like deregulation in the late 70s. But my timing was terrible. So I really didn't have any flying background. I don't have any family that's flown with the airlines or anything like that. But I'd always grown up with my parents telling me, go to college, get a good job, and buy a house for yourself, and that's the American dream. And I'm like, okay, well, how hard is that? I grew up in a not extremely well-off family. The parents were okay, but certainly weren't well off. And so when I went off to college, it was all student loans. It was on me to do something. Yeah. So I went across the country. I moved from California to Florida, and having no idea that a week after I get to school, 9/11 hits. So that started my terrible journey in the airlines. So
what a time!
What a time! Like you can't plan that. So here I am. I moved across the country. I was actually still 17 years old. I was always young for my age there, and for my graduating class. Across the country, I know no one. I'm starting out in this career. I know I'm going to have 200 grand in student loan debt when I get done. But I'm going to be an airline pilot. It's great. 9/11 hits. The industry is just in turmoil, and that basically was the background for the next 4 years while I was in college. So it scared me a lot because I knew this was on me. A lot of the guys I was there with at school, parents might have been paying for it. They didn't have the pressure that I felt, I think. And so it made me work really, really hard, which was a benefit in that I graduated in 2005 from Embry-Riddle, and I was in the top of my class. So nobody had been getting hired that whole time because of that, fallout from 9/11. And I was one of the few that got hired. Right into the airlines, right out of college, 22 years old. So now I think I've got it made. And so I started out in the journey as a pilot, and you work your way up from a first officer. And, I hit the progression well, and I was a captain at 23 years old. And I kind of thought I had it made, and I bought a house for myself. And I'm like, I've checked every box that I was supposed to do. Go to college, get a good job, buy a house for yourself.
Sounds great. Sounds great.
Like, I got this figured out. I was like lower 20s. And, a couple years into that, I'm just going to work every day. I'm just an airline pilot, houses get little, houses get big. It's pretty straightforward job. I don't even know what's going on in the economy or anything. It doesn't matter. I just fly airplanes.
Yeah.
And, it ends up we're in like the 07, 08 time frame. And I just changed to airlines. I just got into an airline, taking a job as a captain. I mean, it's the right path. That's how you get your, the turbine PIC time, and that's how you move forward in the industry. But it was January of 2008, and I walk into work and I check my mailbox for my trip, and I've got this notice in there that says, in 3 weeks, you're getting a 50% pay cut because we're going out of business. And I'm like, I just started here. I'm like, this is terrible. Like, I can't even pay my student loan debt with this. And I'm like, well, shit, I've done everything right. I've gone to college. I've done well in school. I've gotten a great career, that most people thought was a great career. I've bought a house for myself. Oh, by the way, that was upside down by like 80% because the
Wow.
economy had tanked. And I'm like, I've done everything right. And like, I have zero control of anything that happens, you know? It's not like I or anybody I had worked with that was in that same situation had like flown the airplane improperly or like, you know, not passed a check ride or like whatever. Like we're just a victim of the greater economy that we had zero control over. So it was a real, it was like the worst time, but ended up being a great time for me because it made me realize that I've got to depend on something I can control. So the
Yeah.
entrepreneurial journey was born.
So you're a lot of things happen, right? That's crazy to start that journey at the time of 9/11. When I remember that time vividly of planes getting grounded, everything was disrupted. I think I was 21, so I mean I'm different headspace than where we're at today. But and then you get to a point where the economic collapse of 08, 09. So here you are, thought you did all the right things, reflecting back, like what was that next step or push, right? Because to me, you seem like the type of guy that's like, okay, well, let's go to this airline or go over here or, maybe
Yeah.
fly private. Like, what was that next push for you?
So, you know, at the time, it was a little bit it was a little bit of I think mostly frustration. You know, I'm a believer that a lot of things, if you're not happy about something in life, usually it takes a massive frustration to actually change that, right? And so for
Yep.
me, that was something I remember vividly feeling the frustration of I've really done nothing wrong at all. And I am in a very, very bad spot with not much future upside. You know, back then, the airlines were not looking good at all. I mean, they were laying people off, they were going out of business, people were getting downgraded, they were giving pay cuts. Like it was just, it wasn't like I could go, okay, let's go to this next airline. Now you're on if they'll even hire you because they had more pilots than they needed because the economy was contracting. There wasn't much upside.
Got it.
Um, and so, you know, for me, it was just a realization I've got to do something where I can control it to the best of my ability. And so I started looking for just business opportunities. You know, that's what can I do myself that at least I can, you know, have a big effect on what the outcome would be. And I mean, I started with several different little endeavors that didn't work out, just trying little things out.
Yeah.
But you know, an advantage that I had was I had been flying all over North America, you know, all over the U.S., Canada, Mexico, Caribbean, and I'd seen all kinds of markets that I think probably most people hadn't. I mean, I might be in Des Moines, Iowa one day, Charlotte the next, San Francisco the next, you know, and so I that was a little bit of a benefit, and I just kind of had this thought of I don't know how to do anything but fly airplanes, but what's an easy business? Well, I can rent out a house. That's easy, right? You buy a house and someone sends you a check every month, and then you cash the check. Like, cool, greatest business ever. It's turns out there's a little more to it than that, but that's kind of how it started.
So introducing you earlier started with one single piece of property. So you have this idea, hey, real estate, people pay rent, send a check. Sounds to me like with your process and your background, real estate's already there, right? The process has been created to a certain degree, but now you're able
Mhm.
to play. So talk about that leap because I think that leap is really scary for people. I mean, you left. Well, I mean, you were kind of forced, but at the same time, going to be from a let's call it a corporate job to become an entrepreneurial and leap and take that jump. Like, what did you do for that one property that propelled you? Did you like self finance that? Did you have a mentor? Like, what was that like first day like when you decided to go down this path of real estate?
So yeah, keep in mind, you know, now real estate's kind of sexy, right? You know, here in 23. In 2008, 2009, real estate was not sexy, right? But there's again another, I guess, benefit to, you know, getting your pay cut in half and not even having enough money to pay your student loans or your mortgage on your upside down house or anything like that, is it backs you into a corner. And there is nothing more explosive or dangerous than a man backed into a corner with nothing to lose. So that was my propellant. You know, I had nothing to lose. I had a couple $100,000 in student loans. I had a house that was way upside down that I still to this day own, and it's probably barely not upside down today. I mean, it was looking really bad, and I knew how to do nothing but fly airplanes, which was not a good career at the time. So I went out and I took out a bunch of 0% credit cards because I said, well, fuck it. If I'm already broke, I might as well be a broker and have a bunch of 0% credit card debt. And I use that. Balance you get the balance transfer your checking account thing, and
Yeah.
you write yourself a little check. And back then you could buy houses in fairly decent downriver markets for really really cheap. And I balance transferred a bunch of credit card funds, basically 0% for 12 months to my checking account, and bought a rental and rented it out, and it worked. And it like rented right away because back then I didn't really get the whole picture, but people were losing houses and there was a lot of demand for living somewhere. And it just kept like the light bulb just went on, and I'm like, man, I could do this and I could do a little better. I can actually fix up these houses, make them nicer, buy more of them. And I just started to slowly just add a single family house at a time as quick as I could get capital. That was the limiting factor. Um, Took me, I don't know, maybe what did I get? 2 years, 18 months or something. I got up to like 5 houses. And that was a big like turning point for business growth. I think what separated maybe me getting a few units up to getting to where we are today is I found a lender. I started looking for a lender that would give me some debt on these houses. I couldn't go qualify for a mortgage personally or anything. I had like almost no income, at the time, working between my airline job and when I changed to. But after much searching, I found a lender who was able to go in and give me a blanket loan, like a portfolio loan across all properties as like unified collateral, which put me on like a different level compared to what I'd been used to. Now I had, I don't know, I think the first one was 100 grand. I had 100 grand to go work with when I'd been used to working with like, let me pull 3 grand from here and 5 grand from there. And, I got a personal loan for 12 grand or whatever. So now I had what to me was a lot of money at the time, to go out and acquire. And that's what really like set our growth path forward was that newly found access to capital.
So you mentioned like back in '08, you're coming off the, your pilot career, mentioned like the economy. Do you think then like did you really understand what was going on in the economy, or were you just like, I'm going to buy real estate? Because I remember that time and there was like, it was like a big meltdown, but I'm like 20, I'm not that old. Right. So,
Yeah.
it's interesting because you mentioned, because a lot of individuals, how do you get that first house? Sounds like you got to that clip of 5 and then you were able to kind of open up the next level, get some blanket financing. But talk a little bit about, like you don't have a job or your job's over and you've got to get money. You're borrowing 0%. Now, did you look at this business as, I'm just going to reinvest back in these properties, or is it going to spit off some cash so you can like eat day to day, or like how are you living for these first 2 years while you're doing this?
So at roughly the same time that I started buying real estate, I also realized the airline career was terrible, and I transitioned into an air traffic control career, which was a much higher paying, job and more stable and whatnot. But that took probably like 12 months of a process. So I was flying for the airlines. I would like bid. We had like what was called reserves. You could bid to be like on call, and since they didn't really need to fly much, you weren't flying much. So I was like on call to work, but I would really just go work on these houses I was buying, which was a nice benefit. I was driving like an old beat up Honda Accord. It was like the rice and beans story. I was actually living at my mother-in-law's in like a bedroom at her house. Like this is not glamorous shit.
Yeah.
But I was building this business up, and until it started to go somewhere. So yeah, there was a ton of sacrifice, both in like hours worked and lifestyle. But it was really clear to me that there was a path forward, in a scaling that business, in getting much beyond 1, 2, or even 10 or 20, pieces of property. I could see that the income was there, that the demand was there, that it was scalable.
So you sort of built your side hustle, like your 9 to 5 air traffic control, 9 to 5, supporting your life, but your passion was real estate and you're starting to accumulate real estate, which is great. My wife was a nurse, which supplemented my income starting my first business. Otherwise, we would have been behind a dumpster. So thinking back, like I get scared sometimes thinking about those times. It's kind of crazy to think about. So you're an air traffic controller. You've got 5 pieces of real estate. Sounds like, you probably hit, I'm just assuming, love you to elaborate, that your repeatable process or whatever you set up is starting to work. And
Yeah.
at some point, you go from 5 to over 900. I'm gonna say in a very short amount of time, because 2023, but I mean, probably within a decade, you've grown a massive portfolio. So like, what when you get to that point of your air traffic controller, at some point you're probably like, you know the real estate thing's taken off, and now you gotta level up or maybe cut that loose. Like, what was going on during
Yeah.
that time, or how'd you make that transition?
So, in hindsight, I probably made that transition like 3 years too late, but it's hard to give up that safety net, right?
Yeah.
So when I first started, man, I thought if I can get this to 30 properties, like that would be amazing. I think the math back in the day, that would basically replace my air traffic control income, or match that.
Yep.
And I thought I'll have like either a great side hustle, or if they ever did away with air traffic controllers, I don't know, give them a pay cut or something. I at least have some. I was scared of that, what the airline industry had done to me. So I
Yeah.
wanted to, as quickly as possible, have the ability to be financially free. So when I achieved that, which wasn't that hard to do actually, especially when your lifestyle is not that inflated, it's really not that hard to achieve financial freedom. Um, and so it wasn't much to replace. Beyond that point, then it was kind of just a game. It was just like a running up the score in a way. So I add a unit, I'd add a few bucks in cash flow, and that's where I talked earlier. Like I enjoyed tracking it. I started tracking my net worth in September 2011 because I realized that although you might not see the dollars in the bank account every single day, I was building some real wealth behind what I
Yeah.
was doing here. And the only way to see it was to track that. So relentlessly, to this day, I track it on the 20th of every month. I did it yesterday.
So
Um,
do you feel, from a real estate perspective, I want to go back to like your persistent for process and repeatable. And did you see that industry, and did you kind of add your own flavor and build out your own process? Or did you find yourself just adapting to like, there's a million real estate books, or like 1 + 1 is 2, and buy this
right.
house, do this, do that? Or did you have like your own sort of version?
So, thinking back, I was probably always pretty process oriented. We'd have like back in the days, I'd be doing like water bills from my laptop, like, in a bedroom in my mother in law's house or some stupid thing. But that was always like documented, templated. But I think it really started to show when I started to get some scale, and we got to about 50 units, and I started the management company that today is Epic. And then I, after going the wrong way for a while, where I was wearing every hat myself, and only I can do it right, and I think most entrepreneurs have made that kind of e-myth mistake, which again, that's a whole other path where frustration leads you to make a change, and I did. But that got me starting the management company, and I eventually started hiring people to work for me. That's
Yep.
when it was again super clear. This has to be structured, process oriented, operations manual, procedures. I mean, phone calls scripted for outbound calls, things like that. Um, because how else can you expect somebody to do something to a standard you expect it to be done if you don't give them a parameter to work with? Or for me, I'm a fan of the ops manual approach where I like to say a drunk monkey can do this. It's step by step. Click here. Enter this. It's very straightforward, and that's where that came from.
No, it's great you think like that, because I would say in my sphere of entrepreneurs, I know they don't think like that, and then they wonder why things go wrong. I think a lot of entrepreneurs like process, either it's lacking or it's in their brain, and they're like, why didn't this person understand what I'm telling them? It's like, well, what are they supposed to do? Like, I struggle with that as an entrepreneur at times, just thinking that people should know what I'm thinking, or um
Yeah.
so no, that's really interesting. So you get to a point, right? And I just kind of have a visual of Josh running around unclogging toilets and fixing things, right? Because you're the jack of all trades. Nobody's gonna do it better than you, because we're the entrepreneurs, right? So like, what drove that? What made you realize that I've got to start hiring or replacing myself? Because again, like that, to me, like that's the next level of probably explosive growth for you, when you could kind of look in the mirror and say, man, all right, now I've got to grow. What forced you to do that?
Just like anything else, if you're not super smart. So I didn't know what the heck I didn't know, and I took on so much that a 16-hour day of work wasn't enough to do everything, and it led to a level of frustration, where the breaking point for me. I remember thinking that a vacation without phone and internet is absolutely out of the question. Like I am way too tied. Even if I had somebody in the business working for me, they needed me to answer certain questions, right? I was the bottleneck at the top. So frustration is what led to really breaking from that, and saying, okay, I've got to trust that the person I put in place is going to follow the procedures I put in place and run the operation as good or better than I could. And it took just being able to let go of the handle a little bit, let go of that control, and let someone work within the parameters that we laid out.
No, it's good advice. So you were forced to do it because you just didn't have capacity. It sounds great because you have your systems and process guys. So I'm sure onboarding new employees is a little bit easier because you've kind of thought all this through. But then also as an entrepreneur, you're probably like, I got to give up a piece of the pie. Like that's revenue now that you have to pay. So it sort of shifts there. So at this point, I'm assuming you're making pretty good money. You're probably feeling really good, but now you got to start investing in people and bigger process. Sounds like is this when you spun up Epic Property Management and made that a real company?
So we had started, I think, Epic was, officially started back in 2012, but it was small. I had one part-time, assistant, and I think I had a maintenance tech. It was pretty small scale. It grew as we grew. So the benefit to those times were real estate was still fairly reasonable valuation, and I could go out and acquire a building. Well, that brought in some top line revenue. You have a budget for management. And so I kind of forced Epic's growth by adding real estate. Now I've got some top line revenue to grow the management company. But for those it took for me, it's about 700 units to get to where it went from a losing endeavor to run a management company to actually profitable.
700 units.
Right. Which I think the industry standard, I talk about this all the time with other people in property management that are either starting out or want to start out. You could probably do the same thing and get profitable in like 300 to 400 units. But we do some things that are really unique at Epic that, of course, require a lot more capital, a lot more cost to operate. Things like we're open 7 days a week, and we have all this, we have all these vehicles out on the road. Like we operate an amazing niche in the property management industry that's really hard to touch, but it takes a lot of investment to do that, which I've been happy to make, because for me it's always been about how can I run my properties the most efficiently. That's where I've made money, and that's how Epic was really founded, and still really what guides us today.
Now with that process, are you looking at specific types of properties, like family?
Yeah, it's our niche has morphed into this is kind of accidental again, just like everything else. But what I started acquiring was kind of scattered sites. So it started with single families, then I worked into like small to mid-sized multis, 10 to 25 to maybe 50 unit apartment buildings. And I didn't really know why I was buying those types of deals. I wasn't specifically targeting them, but I knew that I would run analysis on, let's say, a 150 unit apartment building, and I could never justify paying what they expected it to sell for. Well, there's good reason behind that, it turns out, looking back, and that's that you go buy a 150 or 300 unit apartment building, and that is set up to run. That's set up for success by its nature of its construction. It's got enough scale right there at that building that you can put on-site leasing, on-site maintenance, maybe a couple of each. Very easy to run. We've got some in the portfolio that are that way, and they're generally much, much easier to run than a 50 unit building where there is no capacity for on-site leasing, no capacity for on-site maintenance. So what you end up getting is the lady that lives there walking around in her bathrobe smoking cigarettes, showing your units, and the guy who got off work and he's 3 beers deep and he's fixing your garbage disposal, and just not a very professional way to run a property. So if you think about it, there's a big reason that a mid-sized multifamily property does not attract the valuation of a larger multifamily property, because they're really, really hard to run. And that just so happens to be the portfolio we had built because I had found good value buying those size properties. And so we built our management company in a way that we can operate that 50 unit building just like you would operate that 200 unit building. And from a tenant perspective, there's very little difference. And that's become our niche, is small to mid-sized multifamily properties from single family up to say 90 units.
So it sounds like you started this really successful, real estate business, and then almost out of necessity, you started another business, Epic Properties, support those properties. Are
100%.
you does Epic do other investors' properties if people want to get involved in single family? Like if I had one property, is that a good opportunity for Epic, or does somebody have to have a certain amount of doors to work with Epic?
No, so we've got, yeah, we do a lot of third party business now. And we manage anything from, one single family house for a guy or several single family houses, makes no difference, up to some larger multifamily and anything in between. And, the benefit is it really fits into our model. So if, I don't have to own every piece of real estate. Of course, we love owning it. It's great revenue stream. But if Wes comes along and has a house or three or whatever that he wants to have managed, it fits right into our system, and it makes no difference to our operations who owns that house. They're all treated the same.
Is there a coverage area? Is it Michigan only? Are you outside of Southeast Michigan, or?
So we go from it's basically Southeast Michigan and Northern Ohio is right now where we operate. So it's an area from Shelby Township, Clinton Township, up East Point, those on the northern border, down to Toledo on the southern border in Ohio, and everything in between. We don't do Detroit at all. That's a whole different animal there. The actual city of Detroit. A whole bunch of other reasons we don't go in there, but everything around kind of the inner city stuff we'll do. And a lot of downriver. It's a great market. Redford's, Livonia's, places like that.
So I want to dive into a couple things, but one, why real estate, right? I mean, there's a traditional route of, giving your money to a financial advisor. It's easier. It might be safe to some people, right? Maybe make 4 to 8%, follow the market, right? You think about real estate and there's all these things that can go wrong. People not paying their bill and all these different things, but there's a lot of competitive advantages. Can you touch on like accelerated depreciation or just some of the advantages there of why people should think about real estate?
For sure. So, I mean, what early on I realized this with just a couple of properties, and in most investments, there's basically limited ways you make money. You might get some cash flow or dividend paid or something like that, maybe some appreciation, but there's usually not several different avenues, but with real estate, so you've got, potential appreciation, right? You've got depreciation, so you get to depreciate the asset that's actually appreciating as far as, for tax purposes, which is amazing. You've got cash flow, which is a major consideration, right? You've got principal pay down, so which one probably my favorite. So you're paying your mortgage every month, and right now I've lots and lots and lots of mortgages, so I pay down a lot of principal every month. That's already factored into your cash flow. Most people don't really think much about that, but at scale, it's a huge number. And then an old Jason Hartman quote from like years ago I love is inflation-induced debt destruction. So you're buying, which now matters. Like 10 years ago, you're like, what's inflation? But you're buying something with today's dollars that your debt's locked in at today's dollars, but you're paying them off with maybe 30-year later dollars, and that can be hugely significant. At 3% inflation, the value of a dollar, gets cut in half every 24 years, right? So who knows what inflation has been recently. So that's a great way to buy something today and pay it off with much cheaper money, which is, it's hard to put a number on what that adds in value, but it can be significant.
So to me, there's like five ways to make money, right? Which there's not a lot of vehicles to do that. But then you look at the market today, right? Houses are at the highest level that we've ever seen. Interest rates are where they at 8%, or they came down a little bit. So I look at my own house and like the buying power I had when I bought it relative to today. Like if I took a mortgage on it, it'd almost be like double, triple from what it is. So I think that's scary for some, or there, it's unpredictable. What is your thought process as things change and where we're at today? Does that affect your strategy, or does that make you more bullish, bearish?
So, I'm pretty bullish, if you will, on the overall housing market, because mainly I don't think you can reproduce housing at even today's prices in a lot of markets, especially the Rust Belt Midwest areas where, you can still buy a reasonable house for below replacement cost. That's not, that at some point doesn't make sense. So that was actually something that way back in, the recession, 08, 09, those years, when you could buy a house for $40,000 that, maybe say that house is 250. It didn't make sense, and it was an opportunity, right? And I kind of still think of that. So we were building some new construction. We would build single family built for rent model back in like 2016 through 2018. It was a great model. And we stopped doing it in like 2018 because our labor costs got too high, labor and materials costs got too high. Again, this is back 2018, way before the recent inflation we've seen.
Yeah.
But we couldn't justify the cost into these houses anymore to lease the property. But look at what it would be now. It's insane. That house that I was building then we were probably getting it done for about $100 a foot, which is really efficient. I'd probably be $200 a foot to build that house today.
Wow.
So it makes me think that it's hard to, over the long run, it's hard to not do well owning real estate because you can't replace it.
So talk a little bit, if you will, about like syndications. So I look at myself as, this sounds amazing, but whether I'm just making an excuse or I'm just too busy, like for me to buy a single family home right now and do all this myself, like I'm just not ready. I'm not comfortable. I've got other stuff going on. How can successful entrepreneurs get involved in real estate? I know you have some experience with syndication. You want to talk a little bit about that and the benefits there?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's really two fronts of that. Number one, I always try to make the caveat when I talk to somebody that's new getting into real estate. If you just want to get into it for one or two or three houses, don't even do it, because the ebbs and flows of the business, if you don't have some scale, can eat you up. You have one water heater go out, that's all your income for maybe a month or two, right? So I always put the caveat: if you're not going to get at least 10 units, don't even get in the first place. But that leads into that syndication model. It's a great model because it lets you get into properties at scale. So you can buy, basically all a syndication is buying a small portion of a larger investment, right? So let's say it's a 80 unit apartment building that we're going to go acquire. From time to time, we'll raise capital for that deal, and we'll divide the capital being raised into shares. So a typical investment for us might be $50,000 shares. And obviously, depending on the size of building and the equity offering, let's just say that's 2.5% of that building. So if someone can put in $50,000 into one of our syndications and in theory own, let's say, 2.5% of that deal, that means they own 2.5% of the cash flow, 2.5% of the appreciation, 2.5% of the depreciation, all the things I just listed, right? The principal pay down, all of that, they just share in the bigger picture, which you start out with scale. And so it can be a fairly simple way to get into real estate without actually going out and acquiring one house at a time.
No, it's really interesting. And I think one of the most exciting things for me about syndications is I don't have to do anything. The smart guys are going to operate and kind of take on most of the responsibility. And the first year I did it, I got something in the mail, and it was a large percentage of what I invested as a loss on my taxes. Yep. And, I was already making money on this deal. And I think a lot of people just don't really understand the concept of accelerated depreciation and some of the advantages that real estate have. It's very lucrative. But I want to go back to something you said, because I think, you're a guy I trust and respect, especially in the real estate side. You just said, unless you're going to get 10 units, if you want 1 to 3, don't even do it. I think that's some solid advice from somebody who's grown to well over 900 units. But again, don't let that be fearful. I got a little bit of taste through syndication, which might get me to the next level. But I'm also realizing, like, I like syndications. Like, I don't want to do the work, and I don't know real estate like real estate. Now, are you guys open, right, with talking about Epic and your real estate deals? Like, when you guys come across deals, are you looking to take on other investors or people that are looking to get in these multi-family deals?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the market. So I would never buy a deal for a syndication that I wouldn't buy myself.
Interesting.
And so the market for the last probably 2 years, since all the liquidity came in after the pandemic, it really is what what lowered yields so much, the market's been incredibly challenging to find any type of value, even in our niches of the market that are hard for most people to touch, kind of that mid-sized multi where we really can typically find some great value. There's just been really limited opportunities. So it's been a pretty slow. I don't think we've closed on a syndication. We have one small one we closed on this year. I take that back. But prior to that, it'll be 2 years now today since our last, relatively mid-sized to large-scale syndication, because the opportunity wasn't there. So I personally think, with my crystal ball, I think it's coming. I think there's some cracks in the economy, macroeconomically at least, and at some point that leads to some potential value. So yeah, as deals come about, certainly we'll be putting some more, marketing deals together.
Awesome. No, that's great, because I think, I'm not sure if people realize that that's an opportunity out there. They may think that they have to come in, buy the house. I've thought about this process before. What's the max I can make in a house? Obviously, you have appreciation and depreciation, all these different things. Do I really want to, put somebody down and break even or lose a bit of money and have a tenant not pay me for 2 months and I'm a little bit negative cash flow? Or do I go into a syndication and potentially make 6 to 15% cash flow, depreciation, appreciation, all that stuff? So I think, weighing your options, there's opportunities out there for people that want to get involved and work alongside super smart, successful people. But I want to touch back on the pilot thing, helicopter, plane. Like, is that where you spend most of your time when you're not accumulating a bunch of real estate?
I love it. Flying is like the ultimate freedom, right? So we've got a King Air 300 that you've been on, Wes, I know, and then I've got an R66 helicopter, which is, I don't know, probably 4 years ago or so I got into helicopter flying. It's a whole different kind of flying, but they're completely different, right? You get in the big airplane, it takes you far, fast, but you're up, it's like being on an airliner. And in the helicopter, you're landing in your backyard, flying around low, great visibility, but you're not going real far, real fast. So totally, I love both angles of aviation. It's just always been something that I've enjoyed, just kind of my passion. And now we just do it for fun instead of for a career, which is, I guess, good.
That's awesome. That changes things. So you're in Grozeal. No, I really appreciate the shares today. You gave a lot of nuggets, a lot of information. Couple things, like where can people find you? If number one, you're a wealth of knowledge, super successful guy in a lot of different areas, but especially if people want to talk about syndications, like how can people connect with you? Where can they find Josh? It's hard to call you when you're flying, but with your day-to-day business, how do you get a hold of Josh?
Sure. So, probably the first and easiest is just social media. So Facebook, Josh Sterling, or Instagram is jk.sterling. And then syndication models, what we typically do if somebody's interested, we've got a regular investor letter that will just go out with, general market updates, typically quarterly. So if you want to get on that, my email is josh@epicpm.com. I would add you to that list. And then I've got a partner who works in investor relations, typically handles that communication. That just keeps people aware of what opportunities we either may have in the pipeline or currently offering on. But either one of those models. Socials are probably best for just following and keeping up, and email if you're looking for the syndication side.
Awesome, Josh. Well, hey, I could pick your brain all day and night about this real estate stuff, but I want to thank you again for coming on and sharing your knowledge. You added a wealth of knowledge, so thank you so much.
All right, thanks for having me, Wes.
So thank you to the audience. If you learned something today or laughed, or you now want to take over the world of real estate, tell somebody about the podcast. This has been another exciting episode of Entrepreneur Intel. Thank you again, Josh. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
This has been another episode of Entrepreneur Intel. Thank you for joining us. For show notes or other episodes, please visit us at entrepreneurintel.com. Until next time.